a short, oh boy.
John.
In the, I have a thing right over the middle of everybody's picture. There we go. In a very short time, I'm going to try to tell you a little bit about a couple of things I experienced and what I've learned from all that. I've thought an awful lot about Vietnam and war and everything since about 1968. And why I think the recent debacle in Afghanistan is a result of what I call the American way of waging war. I do want to mention I'm a lifetime member of Vietnam Veterans Against the War. I'm a member of Veterans for Peace and a member of Vietnam Veterans of America. I was 18 years old in 1966 when the draft got after me. Let me be clear, I was forced by the draft to join the Army very much against my will. The pressure increased until I finally enlisted to get, in quotes, my choice of training. My choice would have been to not take part at all, but that wasn't one of the options. But I was hoping to avoid the infantry in Vietnam. I did avoid the infantry, but I did not avoid Vietnam. I turned 19 in basic training and arrived in Vietnam in September of 1967. In November, I was privileged to see a little bit of the Battle of Dak To, the biggest battle of the war up to that time. And then at the end of January in 1968, I was there for the Tet Offensive. By the end of my year in Vietnam, America had seen the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, violence at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. And I thought, with the small amount of news that we got in Vietnam, I thought there was a civil war breaking out in America and I was wearing the wrong uniform. When I left Vietnam, I still would have 15 more months to do in my Army obligation. It's got to be a better word for it than that. I could not take a chance that I'd be ordered to stand on the steps of the Pentagon and hold a bayoneted rifle against the protesters when I was on their side. I discovered I had a choice, and I chose to spend another year in Southeast Asia, transfer to Thailand without coming home. Everybody in Vietnam, boy, your ultimate goal was to get home. At the end of this, go home and get back to the world. I put it off for another year. My parents weren't very enthused about that, but it was the right thing for me to do. It was a relatively safe environment. The Thai Army was on our side in Vietnam. I fell in love with the country. I toured around as much as possible. I learned a little bit of the language, and I came away feeling that the Thais were the happiest people I've ever seen. When I got home in September of 1969, I cut my Army stay short by 3 months, and I got out of the Army. They didn't reassign me somewhere for 3 months. And I started a career, tried to establish myself. In 1982, we were living just outside Washington, D.C., and all the news was about the Vietnam Memorial being built, and there was a certain amount of controversy about it. And in January of 1982, I was flipping channels on a Saturday night, the old way where you turn the dial. I guess everybody here is old enough to remember those days. And I ran across the CBS famous report, The Uncounted Enemy, that talked about how General Westmoreland required his officers to not report any more than 350,000 enemy soldiers out there aiming their guns at us, knowing full well that there were over 600,000. And I said, oh boy, the truth is coming out. At any rate, by springtime, first of all, I discovered that there were books about Vietnam. I didn't know that. My wife found one, and we went down to the bookstore at the mall, and there was a shelf about so long, and I bought one of each. I went out of there with 2 shopping bags full of books and sat and read one after the other, and they were all fine. They were all valid, but they weren't my story, what I wanted my kids to know. So I sat down one Saturday afternoon with a yellow legal pad and a pen and started taking notes on what I did want my kids to know. And about 9 months later, and about 350 double-spaced sheets of typing paper, this finger types and this one makes capitals, I had a story put together. This is what I saw, and this is what it felt like, and this is what I took away from it. And I get up every morning and hand what I had done last night to my wife and go off to work. And when I got home, we'd talk about it. And I had never written more than a high school term paper. I certainly had never ever dreamed that I would write a book, but that pile of papers, through a very cosmic set of circumstances, ultimately became a book, which was And a Hard Rain Fell. And if I was really prepared, I'd hold one up so you could see it, but it's on the Plowshares website. You can see the cover of it, or you can go by Barnes and Noble and you can see it there. That was originally published by Macmillan in May of 1985, and it's still on most bookstore shelves, or many bookstore shelves, after 36 years and 27 printings. I've been very fortunate. I've had cards and letters and phone calls, emails, personal visits from other veterans, their families, anti-war people, students from around the world. I've gotten to meet many notable personalities, Dave Dellinger and Bill Earhart and Ron Kovic, and on down the line, Dan Ellsberg, and been very fortunate. It's been great. My favorite thing is to speak to high school or college students or communicate by email. I volunteer with VVAW to be a contact, and surprisingly, students from all around the world contact VVAW with questions and things, and I've done, God, students from all around the world. The second book is actually kind of dedicated to one of my students from Germany. After I retired in 2013, I had been traveling around to schools and civic groups and veterans groups and everything for about 30 some years. And there were questions, there were things that come to light. I have an extensive, expensive collection of books about Vietnam, and have learned a fair amount that I've put things together in my head. And I wanted to make a final statement. This is what I have learned about Vietnam. That resulted in a book called Vietnam Reconsidered, the War of the Times and Why They Matter. Both books are available at Barnes and Noble. I know in Valley View, I'm assuming down at the other store, I have not had the chance to stop in and ask them, but Barnes and Noble's been good to me. First of all, the American wars in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Iraq, and Afghanistan have all been waged with the same basic strategy, which is called a war of attrition. I believe General Westmoreland came up with that term. The intention of the strategy is to cause so much suffering and damage to both the military and the civilians that the people of that opposing country or area or society will grow tired and stop supporting that enemy military. I call that the American way of waging war. It was fairly effective for Sherman back in the Civil War days, marching across the South. It hasn't worked since. It did not work in Vietnam, and it hasn't worked in some of the more recent conflicts. It's pretty obvious that we have the best equipped, best funded military on the planet, and we can cause death and destruction on an unlimited scale. But we've been defeated by countries like Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Iraq, Libya, Sudan, Afghanistan. Simply stated, the point is we cannot kill millions. The term back in Vietnam days was bomb them back to the Stone Age, poison them with chemicals, or vaporize them with nuclear weapons and win their hearts and minds. It just doesn't work. These actions will not encourage their willingness to befriend us in the arenas of science, trade, and commerce, or the humanities. The simple truth is, carpet bombing and killing without restraint create resentment and determination to resist our actions in the very people we're supposedly trying to win over. Those sentiments have been the results of our militarism and empire building since the end of World War II. And most recently, we've seen a big kerfluffle because we'd agreed to sell state-of-the-art submarines to Australia, sabotaging a deal that the French had made to sell them French submarines. And now France and Australia are both mad at us. This is not good foreign policy. It may be good economics for the company that builds submarines, but might does not make right, except in the hallowed halls of the Pentagon, the White House, and the Capitol. Meanwhile, I'll suggest that the American people, and especially the anti-war segment, seem unable to realize that the vast majority of money spent on military bases around the world, but most of the, in quotes, defense budget stays right here at home. Congress gains re-election votes in direct response to their ability to send defense contracts to hometown businesses. The ultimate American status symbol is not a Rolex watch on your wrist or a Rolls Royce in your driveway. The ultimate American status symbol today is a defense contract, a license to coin money. I'll suggest, as I've discussed in chapter 21 of Vietnam Reconsidered, the Defense Department, the Pentagon, has never been successfully audited throughout all American history. It was demanded that they submit to an audit and that that audit be completed by 2017. And they brought in 3,500 professional auditors. And finally, at the end, they threw up their hands and said, I wish I had the book in front of me, I'd find the exact words, but the flim-flams and hiding things and so forth, you couldn't do an effective audit. And it's built that way. Several independent investigations by credentialed financial experts or journalists have exposed the systematic disappearances of trillions of dollars within the Pentagon, actually tens of trillions of dollars, an amount equal to our national debt prior to the COVID pandemic. these people found we were missing, just happened to be missing $21 trillion. And the Pentagon Defense Department said, well, we don't know. And I suggested that they start looking under the cushions of the couches throughout that building and see if there wasn't some small change there that would attribute to that. But 20 years ago, remember Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld? Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney held a press conference. And Donald Rumsfeld said, America's greatest adversary, direct quote, is not China or Russia. It's closer to home. It is the Pentagon bureaucracy. The date of that was September 10th of 2001. And the next day, events, which we call 9/11, kind of took over the news reporting and everything. And that statement never was very much publicized to the world, but Donald Rumsfeld actually said that. If you get a chance, Chapter 21 of Vietnam Reconsidered has far more about the corruption and profiteering happening every day in the Pentagon. And I hope someday a few of you will join me in my little campaign to defund the Pentagon. I take no satisfaction in telling you that after all of this studying and trying to figure out what happened and why it needed me and so forth, I've concluded that America really is in the business of death and destruction. Mom and Pop don't really like to accept that fact, but we've chased so much of our manufacturing out of the country while the government nurtures the weapons manufacturers. A few years ago, Ford and General Motors were essentially bankrupt and the government had to help them out. Chrysler has been renamed Stellantis. I don't know if anybody knows that, but it's controlled by the Fiat company of Europe. And notice, if you will, we haven't seen any financial restructuring at all at Raytheon or Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Boeing, or Northrop Grumman. Now Biden has appointed an ex-board member of Raytheon to be Secretary of Defense. Once upon a time, it was said that what's good for General Motors is good for America, but now that's true of the defense contractors. I ran across an interesting fact that most people are not aware of. It's estimated the Pentagon currently has more than 600,000 contractor companies in their employ. Many of these companies are visibly corrupt, profiteers, and the Pentagon's financial entanglements with them have resisted all attempts at auditing or straightening it out or seeing where our tax money is really going. Again, several financial investigations have found tens of trillions of dollars in quotes unexplainably missing. So we have to conclude that corruption also plays a large role in the state of our nation today. Gary's email announcing this little presentation indicated I'd be discussing how my experiences turned me against the war, and all war, and also the continuing impact of the war. I can tell you that there isn't a day I don't think about my military experience. It started when I got off the bus at Fort Dix for basic training back in actually it was New Year's Eve of 1966. The next day was 1967, and continued till I processed out of the Army in Oakland, California in September of 1969. I like to remind people of the times that shaped the Vietnam generation. I think it's, when we're talking history, you have to look at the people who participated in that history. And I think we have more available knowledge of the Vietnam generation and the guys who went to Vietnam than we've ever had for any other army before. Just as a few quick reminders, we were the first American Army to have grown up with portable radios. Before that, it was the big console in the living room, and FDR had Saturday evening chats with America. But all of a sudden, the best Christmas present I probably ever got in my life was a little pocket-shaped radio that I could put in my pocket and go riding my bike and have rock and roll music everywhere I went. It was terrific. Rock and roll music. We were the first generation with that, obviously, and protest songs. And we were the first generation of American soldiers that had been brought up with television. Our background included all the TV cowboys and adventure series, from Roy Rogers and the Lone Ranger to Zorro, Batman and Robin, Gunsmoke, Rifleman, Have Gun Will Travel, and so many others. Every time we watched those shows and many more, right triumphed over wrong. It always came out that way. And that became, I guess, kind of our expectation. We grew up with Mickey Mouse Club, Davy Crockett, Howdy Doody, and Captain Kangaroo. And when we got a little older, Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best. We listened to the anti-war songs of Bob Dylan, the Beatles, Peter, Paul, and Mary. We witnessed the civil rights movement and the music of James Brown and Sam Cooke. We believed in John F. Kennedy, in Lenny Bruce and Simon and Garfunkel and Marilyn Monroe, Timothy Leary and the Grateful Dead. Our generation saw the corruption, the suffering, and the poor around the globe, and we were moved to replace it with something better. And then they drafted us, trained us with slogans like "the only good gook is a dead gook," and I hope I don't offend anybody by saying that, or "kill them all and let God sort them out." That was the environment. From the day I got off the bus, that was all you heard. Kill them all. Let God sort them out. They sent us halfway around the world and put incredible weapons in our hands. When I think of the effectiveness, for lack of a better word, of the weapons we saw 50 years ago and what we have today, oh man, it's frightening. I don't know how anybody can allow their son or daughter to join the military and go off to war. It's just inhuman. Anyway, they sent us halfway around the world and put incredible weapons in our hands, and we witnessed the destruction of carpet bombing, napalm, miniguns that could put out thousands of rounds per minute. We saw death and destruction on a scale unprecedented in the history of warfare. More explosives were dropped on Vietnam than were used by all the Allies in World War II in Europe, Africa, and the Pacific combined. On a little country the size of New Mexico. And again, we'll go back to the statement about bombing them back to the Stone Age. We did. You know, there are guys that will tell you, oh, Vietnam, we should have started at the southern end and marched north and shot anything that moved. Well, basically almost did that. And the idea that we were told over and over was, oh, we're doing this for the Vietnamese people, except we were doing it to the Vietnamese people. And it didn't take a PhD or anything to figure this out and see it every day and say, this isn't right. Most people think the majority of our bombing was targeted on North Vietnam. It's amazing when I go out and I talk to people, everybody, oh yeah, the North. Only 20% of our bombing was done north of the demilitarized zone. 80% of the explosives we dropped in Vietnam, we dropped on South Vietnam an absolutely dirt poor agricultural country. A single B-52 carried as much as 30 tons of bombs, and its payload would utterly destroy every living thing in an area 0.6 of a mile wide and 1.2 miles long. They flew in sorties of 6 planes. So you take that destruction and multiply it times 6, and that was a bomb run. The US conducted 126,652 B-52 missions during the Southeast Asia War. And today, unexploded bombs and artillery shells are still killing peasants in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And the Vietnamese government says it will take estimates it will take another 50 years to finish clearing them all away and make it safe for a kid to go out and walk across a rice paddy. America sprayed more than 18.2 million gallons of Agent Orange, Agent Blue, and related chemical defoliants over Southeast Asia. Chemical weapons that contain dioxin, the most toxic substance known to man. Still today, Americans and the people of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos are suffering the effects of exposure to those chemicals. And I should tell you that our firstborn, a son, was found dead in his cradle at the age of 14 days from birth defects that I attribute to my exposure to Agent Orange when I was in Vietnam. My wife did nothing to deserve that. That's a nasty deal. That, gee, your husband survived the war and came home and you married him, and there's this poison in him that kills children. I resent that. I will never get over that. I must mention that because they recognize the terrible history of Vietnam and how the military knowingly poisoned its soldiers and then lied and refused to take any responsibility far into the future, today it is very common for America's young men to leave a specimen in a sperm bank before they deploy. I made that statement at a high school down in Noonan, Georgia, just south of Atlanta, and a young lady jumped up and said, "My brother just did that yesterday." They don't trust our government that much. So I thought that was interesting. I had occasion to go to a hospital in Pleiku. I hurt my back and I needed x-rays. And while I was there, I saw that the hospital, when they had time, would work on Vietnamese kids, especially some that were really hurt. And this was a little guy, I don't know, 7, 8, 10 years old, who had been caught in napalm and was melted, for lack of a better term. He was black and bubbled like a pizza that's done too much. And his right arm was melted to his chest, and his fingers came out of his shoulder and just kept twitching like that. You don't see something like that and forget it very well. What chance would that kid have in a poor agricultural society to have any future at all? I mean, when we were doing this for the Vietnamese people, I guess he just fell by the wayside. The point, friends, is that we're unprepared for what we would see, and being there, seeing and experience it, defied everything most of us had ever been taught about right and wrong. Did you know by 1972, fully 25% of all Americans in uniform worldwide were either deserted, absent without leave, openly refusing to comply with orders, or actually mutinying. Morale in the military was terrible, not just in Vietnam, but around the world. The basic mission in Vietnam was wrong, immoral, and unjust, and many of our leaders were incompetent, corrupt, or just trying to avoid danger when they sought riches, promotions, or an office in the Pentagon. The real reason America lost the Vietnam War was that the American soldiers refused to fight it anymore. What was happening was too awful, too terrible, and too unfair for many of our young soldiers to take part. Some refused while in country. Many waited till they came home to speak out against the atrocities. And Vietnam was the first war where actual veterans of that war came home and protested, openly protested in numbers that never happened before. Got under Richard Nixon's skin too. Somewhere between 3.5 and 5 million human beings lost their lives in our wars in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. American combat actions in the Vietnam War ended in 1973, except the bombing, and the war itself ended in 1975. Today, at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, that we call the Wall, contains the names of 58,315 Americans killed in Vietnam. But the experts say, when you start talking with the people that are working with us every day, since returning from the war, more than 200,000 and possibly more than 300,000 American Vietnam veterans have taken their own lives since coming home. The Veterans Administration says 22 veterans commit suicide every day. This morning's Roanoke Times says 2021 showed an increase in suicides in the active duty military. They are two different statistics, but things are not good on either side of that issue. The Veterans Administration, I read that, and yes, the veterans of our wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia, Somalia, and all the other places are continuing to commit suicide at a rate that far exceeds that of the general population. I suggest that America needs to change its direction, especially its foreign policy, and concede that war is not good for people. It's a very simple thing to say, and it would totally change our foreign policy 180 degrees if somebody would just admit it. The problems we veterans have experienced and are experiencing every day are primarily due to the American way of waging war. Far too many military participants, veterans, are horrified by what they've seen or experienced in modern warfare. They, or we, are sickened, unable to stomach the horrors or the suffering. PTSD, which I define as post-traumatic stress damage, is often just the soldier's basic humanity confronting the American way of waging war. For a variety of economic, moral, and social reasons, we can no longer afford American imperialism or militarism. I thank you for the invitation tonight, Gary and Zan, for putting this together. And for all you folks, thank you for your attention. I said I would answer questions. I don't know how you do that through Zoom. So if somebody wants to raise their hand or something, I'm most willing.
Yeah, just unmute yourself if you're muted and you can ask John or make comments. I wonder, what is the Vietnam Veterans Against the War? What are they up to nowadays? I haven't heard about them in a while.
Um, Opposed to militarism in every form that America has, looking for veterans benefits. There's a very active movement. It gained a lot of momentum under President Trump, but there's a huge movement to privatize the Veterans Administration. The Veterans Administration, I will mention, is the largest military or largest medical organization in America, and it is not for profit. A doctor that joins the VA gets a salary and doesn't have to compete with anybody and doesn't have to hire a staff to submit inquiries to the insurance company and ask their permission to do work. They do what's necessary and they do it very well. I didn't know the VA, I recently learned, is one of the great medical research organizations in America, and teaching. 70% of all the physicians in America supposedly have been trained by the VA, and then they go off to the for-profit industry and try to get rich. But Trump and his three guys from Mar-a-Lago, advisors on how to straighten out the VA, neither of them, none of the three had ever had any medical or military experience, but they were going to straighten it out. And they have done some damage, but we're trying to make that right. There's a lot of things for VVAW to do, and trying to establish a real history of what really happened in Vietnam, and make people aware of what that really was all about, and why some of us came home and said, that's wrong. What's going on over there is wrong. It wasn't a popular thing for American people to hear, but they needed to hear it. So yeah, there's plenty to do, and Veterans for Peace, the same thing. Just trying to say the American militarism has grown to such a huge extent that we can't afford it much longer. Number one, looking at dollars, and it's so fearsome what we can do to the world. We've got what, 3,000, I believe, nuclear weapons, and now we've got a so many $1 trillion program to revamp them all in the next 10 years or something. Do we need this? We got kids that don't know when their next meal's going to be, that don't have textbooks in school, and on and on and on. All of the things that progressives are trying to do. But boy, oh boy, Biden puts in a proposed budget for the Defense Department, and Congress raises it by $25 billion. Really? I'm sorry, but I read a lot of tweets from AOC, and I think she's wonderful. I think she's right on target, and it's amazing. Today I read this, and it's kind of interesting. Congress spends very little time discussing the defense budget, which at its current rate would cost $7.78 trillion over each of the next, well, it's at $1 trillion a year. So 7.78 trillion over the next 10 years. That amount is significantly higher than the defense spending of any other nation in the world. In 2020, the US spent $778 billion on defense, making up 39% of our overall government spending. China, the country with the next highest defense budget, spent 13%. We were 39, they're at 13 of its overall spending on defense at only 252 billion. India spent 3.7% at 72.9 billion. Russia spent 3.1% at 61.7 billion, and the United Kingdom spent 3% at 59.2 billion. Boy, we can kill people and destroy things better than anybody in the world if that's what we want to build our society around.
Does anybody else have questions or comments for John?
I have a comment. I think that you should not give up on demonstrations. I was very involved in demonstrations, and at one point, Daniel Ellsberg was talking to us in Washington in the cathedral just prior to a demonstration. And he said he had seen the people go around the Pentagon and demonstrate and talk about the war and all the bad things in the war, in Vietnam War, and didn't believe it. And then one time he just looked down at the people marching there and he said, what if they are right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he went in and secretly published Pentagon papers and went to jail for it. Yes, but he said you never can underestimate when your demo is going to get through to somebody. So I just want to say that from experience.
I have not given up as such, but I don't. We used to live right outside Washington, and I used to go a lot. Now I'm getting older, and we leave it to some of the younger people for the most part. I do things like this, trying to stir people up, and I'm a pot stirrer. Sherman?
What was the role of military contractors before and during and after the Vietnam War? I remember reading I think it was in Economist magazine, they were talking about the Afghanistan war and how profitable it was for the military contractors. That was in Economist magazine. They said that their profits were, their stock prices were something like 50% above companies that weren't into contracts. It was so lucrative during that period. We were just throwing away money. And I was just wondering, in the Vietnam War, was there much involvement with military contractors? And
it was nowhere near as well established. I don't think there were 600,000 companies at that time, but boy, the ones that were there were very profitable, very, I can't, geez, I hate to paint with a big brush, but there was every sign that some of them were very corrupt. And they made a lot of money, and some of them lived a very good life. It's interesting, if you look at the numbers of dead in the war in Afghanistan, is 2,461 American military, but it was well over 3,000 defense contractor people were killed. I've tried to find out if that was American citizens or if it was included Afghanis that were hired. But, you know, in Vietnam, they were around. I wasn't in a situation that saw much of them, but port facilities and all of that type of thing, the logistics of bringing all the material in and getting it distributed where it needed to go. That was, a lot of that was contracted out. Interesting that the laws or whatever of Vietnam said Americans could not unload their own planes or ships. It had to be done by the Vietnamese. And a very dear friend of mine watched the trucks being unloaded at the airport and heading off, and followed them. And 80% of the goods we shipped to Vietnam went directly to the black market or to the Viet Cong. 20% actually were delivered to our soldiers. He started writing letters. And he was a civilian, by the way. He was working for a defense contractor company as a security guard. Got to the point he got nowhere, and he actually arranged and had a short meeting with General Westmoreland, who told him, "Come on, fella, you have the greatest opportunity in the world to get rich. Close your mouth, open your wallet, watch it fill with cash, and go home in a year or two and live good. Don't make waves." He kept making waves, actually flew home and testified before a Fulbright committee. Shortly after that, he and his wife were driving in the state of Washington, were run off the road. She was killed. He was in a wheelchair for 2 years. Very, very proud man. The rest of the story is before he ever went to Vietnam, he was brought up in Hungary. And as part of the Hungarian Revolution, was caught and sentenced to life in the gulags in a coal mine. And one day they came and said, "You're free." He doesn't know why. To this day, he doesn't have any idea why. He went back to Hungary, went around the corner and saw a Russian tank coming at him down the street and said, "This is not good," and escaped over the border into Austria. And the CIA said, "We want to know all about those prisons you were in." So he talked with them. They gave him a free ride to America. The plane landed and they said, "Have a good life," and sent him out to find his way. And he did some security work in the Dominican Republic when we had problems down there. And then went to Vietnam to get the big bucks, and it really bothered him. And he's, to this day, he just says, there's so many things, great things that people can do. He grew up with good music and lived a good life before the Second World War came. And he said, why do we spend all of this time and energy and everything perfecting better ways to kill each other and destroy what other men have built? It doesn't make sense. So
John, have you
he's
been back?
94 years old. And
John, have you been back to Vietnam, or do you have any interest?
No.
You haven't?
no, I didn't see anything there that I really want to see again, to be honest with you. I know a lot of people who have gone back and it was very meaningful for them, but I'd go back to Thailand in a minute if I could afford it and all the logistics were right. I'm getting kind of old for that now, but I love Thailand. But Vietnam, what happened happened, and nothing we can do is going to change that. I have some friends that are working over there still today, trying to help, the Agent Orange children, and helping to dig up unexploded ordnance and remove it safely. And
Kent had a
I,
comment.
pardon me?
Kent was having a comment or a question.
Did you?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yes, John, the expression of gratitude to veterans and those in the service, thank you for your service.
Yeah.
You familiar with that? Thank you for your
Oh, yeah,
service. I mean, that,
yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. So I want to, before my wife and I, we need to leave now, but before we do, I want to thank you for your service. And it has nothing to do with the military. It has to do with your work now. And
Yeah.
I do want to thank you for your service. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I know what people are trying to say when they say thank you for your service, and they don't know what I've seen and what my experience was. They mean well, and I appreciate what you're saying. I retired, and this is my work now. This is what I'm trying to do, is just say, think, people, and remember a little bit. Bob Dylan and the Beatles were tremendously important to us. And one day they came and got us and grabbed us and put us on a plane to the other side of the world. But all of that stuff was still ringing in our head. And we knew there was an alternative, another way. That's what the history of Vietnam really should be, of what happened to America, is we dared to believe that we could get along with each other. Gosh, there was Woodstock, it really happened. It wasn't totally successful in the long run, but man, we got to keep working toward it. And someday, maybe we can stop killing each other and start listening to each other and find solutions to things, But Ken, thank you. I appreciate it
Thank
very
you
much.
very much.
Any other questions or comments for John? Well, thanks, John. This has been a really good program again. We had you in for a program in December. We wanted to repeat it, so thanks for
We do
doing.
have a hand up over here.
Oh,
Shawman, am I saying that right?
It's Scott. I was just saying thank you. I don't really have anything to say, but I appreciate what you had to say. It's very informative. It's kind of shocking, and I struggle just personally. Just my own situation is I try not to be cynical, and I try not to be cynical to the point of destructiveness where I'm not really contributing to something better. I don't know. That's just I feel like a lot of this work that you do. I'm just imagining you're in a sense you're like banging your head against futility.
Yeah. Well, if I don't do it, who will, sort of thing, But I reached a point where it seems to me there are two ways of living your life or doing what you do. There's the destructive and there's the constructive. And who do we remember fondly through history? It's the people who were constructive, the Michelangelos or the Madame Curie, or on down the line, Beethoven and Mozart, and they created something worthwhile and beautiful and really contributed to the world. And we don't really have a very high regard for the people who were very destructive. And of course, the first one on the list is always Adolf Hitler, but there were a whole lot of them. And you have to make a choice. I think when you get up in the morning, as much as the choice is allowed, I have huge problems with the draft. There's people today saying, "Oh, we need to draft back. If they drafted the sons of rich people, it would make the world better." And I say you can't put a fire out by throwing gasoline on top of it. It's not a fit place for the sons of rich people or poor people or any people. We need to generate peaceful means for this country to have an economy and a civilization that's actually civilized, that's not based upon better ways to kill people. That's an industry that's dead end as far as I'm concerned. And that's not a play on words, but it doesn't lead anywhere but to more trouble and more bloodshed. So
Like Gandhi
anyway,
said,
I have a lot of opinions. I could show you opinions all night. I hope you never see a war. That's the bottom line. I hope you never ever see one. It's not nice to see.
Did you have something you wanted to say, Karen?
well, I don't know whether you have the time for it,
Sure.
but I was 10 years old when the war stopped in Germany, and I was in Germany. I grew up in Germany. And my first thought that turned me against the war was not so much the bombings of Berlin and the evacuation and everything, but when I realized that when we became occupied, the first troops that came into our area were American troops in Bad Harzburg in the Hanover area. And they were confiscating houses for their officers to live in. And so they took everything out into the street that the people didn't get to have packed up with them because it was always fast. And there was a bag of sugar, and everything was thrown into a fire on the sidewalk. And I saw that bag of sugar, and I reached for it and grabbed it, and they pushed me back with the butt of their gun, because the MPs were guarding the fire, and I can see why they would. But my idea was, you don't want it, and I need it so badly. And all before that, I had thought, war starts because somebody wants something that somebody else doesn't want to give up. And I was thinking here at this point, you didn't want it, but I still couldn't have it. And that to me was war. I mean, that was the first time that I thought there's something wrong about war. Something, I could say psychologically or from a human point of view, or whatever you want to call it. But the bombs didn't do it, because I always thought, somebody has the right to do this and the right to do that. But yeah.
Yeah, at 10 years old, you don't question that so much, but a bag of sugar is pretty darn important.
Yep. It was at that time.
Once upon a time, I was with, there were 3 or 4 of us guarding POWs who were supposed to be doing some work. And one of them, these were Viet Cong, and one of them discovered there was a bee's nest in the ground. And he asked, can I go over there, whatever? And we said, yeah, okay. And the 2 guys went and dug with their hands to get the honey and bring it up and eat it. And they were stung 1,000 times. And, some of the guys said, you shouldn't let them do that. Why? We should, because they're Viet Cong, we shouldn't allow them to eat. Look what they're going through just for a handful of something to eat. And I'll never forget that you saw that kind of thing all the time. They're only gooks. And again, I apologize if that language offends anybody, but that's what we heard over and over and over again. Don't give them anything. Just, the only good gook is a dead gook. And that was the whole philosophy of the war. And of course, it didn't work. It didn't benefit anybody except a few rich guys that sold guns and ammunition and uniforms and things to the military. They did pretty well, I guess. Bombers, B-52s. Anyway, I thank you very much. You'll see me around. I don't get to Roanoke a whole lot, but from time to time, I'll be around.
So we do a silent peace vigil in front of the Roanoke City Market building on the third Saturday of every month at noon. So
Yeah.
if we're in on third Saturday, join us.
One of these days I'll surprise you, Gary.
That would be lovely. Bring a
Would
stool,
love to.
bring a hat.
Mhm.
Thanks, Sam, for organizing this.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Gary, for all your help.
I see Susan Osborne there. If you're not on our email list, Susan, and you wish to be, you could put your email in our chat or your contact information. We have a quarterly newsletter, so email and/or mailing address. And are you on our email list, Susan?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so you have
And
contact.
I got the newsletter today, and I asked Gary, how can I get part of the Zoom, which is happening today? So I just got the newsletter today.
Are you, Karen, are you on our email list? Do you know?
I don't think I want to be on an email list now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I may have asked you that before. Well,
Yeah.
thanks again. I'll mention for Susan, who came a little late, that we have another program, a two-part program actually, called the Jesus Fatwa program. Professor Salim Ahmed is going to be presenting it on November 19th and December 17th. It's 5 short films at 7 o'clock through Zoom, and it's about what Muslims actually believe. So we'll be putting out word for that. So again, thank you everybody for coming to this, and thanks, John. Stay in touch, all right?
My pleasure.
All right.
And
Bye-bye.
Salim
Good night,
is,
everyone. Have a great weekend.
What's that, Karen?
I was going to say Salim is a good one because he was at our Sunday school class and
Kidding. Yeah,
interacted very well.
yeah, he's presented, we have a youth conference over here called the Teen Peace Jam, and he's been involved in that every year. So
Mhm.
I think that'll be a good program. He's presented it before in the area. So that'll be November 19th and December 17th. We'll be putting word out. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Good night.